Good evening, my name is Jeff Lashley and this is week 1 to firearms inspection and troubleshooting. It's August 27th, 2023. First thing I'm going to do is clear my firearm and workstation and make sure that everything's safe. Always following the safety rules and keeping safety paramount. So first thing I'm going to do on my firearm is make sure that it is on safe. And then I'm going to pull the bolt to the rear manually, and then I'm going to visually and physically inspect the chamber to make sure that there is no rounds in the chamber, and there are not. I'm also going to check all my tools, devices, and firearms, magazines, and equipment. Make sure that they are also clear of any rounds. And the only cartridge that I have is a dummy round that SDI sent me. So moving along with the assignment, I'm going to demonstrate a functions check. Basically, if the initial functions check without using any snap caps or any live ammunition. We will not do any live firing, but I will not be using any dummy rounds for this either. I'm going to be checking the unlocking, and which is unlocking is what the bolt is doing in the chamber, is physically turning and unlocking whenever the bolt is being brought to the rear. And whenever doing that, you can feel for it to unlock, and you can hear it, you can feel it, and you shouldn't feel any drag. You know, this is a fairly new rifle. It's kind of tight, but really opens the breech very easily. And at that time, whenever you feel it coming back to the rear, you can feel it start to hit the top of the hammer, which would be cocking it. If it had been fired, the hammer would be up, and the bolt going to the rear would be laying that hammer back down and engaging the sear and locking it into position. And that's what's called cocking, but you could feel that whenever it actually goes to the rear. And then once the bolt carrier group is then going forward, it's going to lock back into position. The cam turns, is guiding in the rails, and it turns the bolt, and it actually locks it back into position. So you could feel all of that going forward. Next thing, I'm going to actually go through the 8 cycles of operation, and I'm going to do so by using my feeding device, which is a magazine that is empty of live rounds, and I'm going to use a dummy round. I'm going to go ahead and load it into the firearm. It is locked into position. As such, whenever the bolt carrier group is brought to the rear, you can see that the round is actually stripped off and guided in to the chamber, which is considered feeding. Once the round is all the way into the chamber, that is chambering. Is what you're feeling for here is feel any kind of binding or catching on anything, or just not not seating properly. Once it is chambered, then again it's locked. The bolt turns into position and locks. Next would be firing. You would actually, if it was a live round, you could fire it, and actually right now we could put it on fire and fire it, but we're not going to do the functions check on the firing control group yet. So we're not going to pull the trigger. Once that happens though, you would, if it did fire, it would move the bolt carrier group to the rear. It would unlock the bolt again. As on this, it did not grab, the extractor did not grab the dummy round. So now it's pulling the round backwards, which is unlocked, going through the extracting and ejecting phase. So the extractor has grabbed the cartridge and is bringing it to the rear, and the ejector is kicking it out properly, and then with the magazine inserted, is locked the bolt to the rear. We'll go ahead and remove that magazine at this time. Again, it is clear, and the bolt is locked to the rear. As the bolt came to the rear, it cocked. If the hammer had been dropped and struck the firing pin, it would have cocked it to the rear, or in the position ready for firing, which is known as cocking. So there I went over the 8 cycles of operation: feeding, chambering, locking, firing, unlocking, extracting, and ejecting. As a gunsmith, you'll want to observe everything about the firearm going through that process to make sure that it is working as advertised, so the firearm can be diagnosed for any failures, and if there's any unsafe conditions, they can be fixed. So going from there, we will go ahead and do a safety, the firing control group functions check. And basically, with the firearm on safe, the trigger should not be able to move. There might be slight movement, but it should not be engaged at all. It would not move past that. So again, I'm going to make sure that there is no rounds in the chamber before I do so, and always keeping the weapon pointed in a safe direction. So put the fire selector on fire, and nothing should have happened once that's done. So as you're moving it, the weapon should not fire. That indicates that the firing control group is working. Will not do anything until the trigger is actually pulled. Once the trigger is pulled, the hammer will drop and strike the firing pin. You can keep holding it down while cycling it, or once you let go, you will hear a click, small click, and then whenever the bolt carrier group is cycled, which is, through normal operation, it would have automatically been put to the rear by the gases and cycled through. Whenever it comes to the rear, the firing mechanisms will re-engage and cock back into position. So as it comes back, you'll hear clicks, and the trigger will move forward. And this repeats itself as you're firing. So if I was to hold it down, it will continue to reset and drop until I'm done. Now that the bolt carrier group was home, and basically whenever I let off of it, it reset the trigger back into place because the cocking operation had reset. So, and then at that time, you can put it back on safe, and if you pull the trigger, nothing will happen. So this basically concludes a functions check for an AR-15. Overall, you'll be able to feel and hear any problems that you may have. You just have to continue to work on different types of rifles and setups to really get a good feel for everything, but that's pretty much the gist of it. So thank you very much. That's it.